Join me in a word of prayer. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, most holy. Amen. So today, as you know, is Trinity Sunday, a day when we celebrate the mystery, love, and redemption and wisdom that compose our one God in three persons. So I did say mystery. Surely that is the picture we have of God in this passage from Isaiah. Can you imagine the biggest space you have ever been in, filled simply with the hem of a robe? Smoke fills the air. And then there are these odd creatures that are flying around. I believe that I would be feeling very small and insignificant in such a setting, and perhaps you share that feeling. Now these creatures, these seraphim that surround God, declare that God is holy and that the earth is full of God's glory. And our first hymn that we sang today speaks to how we can talk about God, immortal, invisible, wise, inaccessible to us, blessed, glorious, almighty, victorious, unresting yet unhurried, a just ruler in might, and a fountain of goodness and love. Holy. Now, I suspect if I were to ask you to describe God, I wager I would hear many of those words repeated. But in addition, I would bet that I will hear others like faithful, steadfast, loving, righteous, full of grace and mercy, perfect. Surely all of these words and many others describe who God is. And in the face of all this majesty and mystery, Isaiah finds himself unworthy. He describes himself as lost, a man of unclean lips, living among a people of unclean lips. It would seem Isaiah has just thrown a bunch of non sequiturs. No, I'm sorry. Turn too many pages. It would seem that Isaiah was speaking the truth. King Uzziah had just died, and he began his reign well, doing what was right in the sight of the Lord. However, when he became strong as a king, he also became proud. Under his rule, worship became unacceptable to God, and injustice and unrighteousness was characteristic of the nation. The first 5 chapters of Isaiah describe how far the people had fallen from a right relationship with God. It is no wonder that Isaiah felt unworthy in God's eyes. Now, in the passage from John's Gospel, we encounter a mysterious conversation between Nicodemus, a Pharisee, and Jesus. Nicodemus is a learned man, a man in a position of power. He knows that Jesus is a teacher and that he comes from God, which gives him the power and authority to do signs and wonders, again stretching our imagination. Yet Nicodemus cannot understand what Jesus is teaching him. Their conversation sounds like a bunch of non sequiturs, right place for that phrase, a bunch of non sequiturs just thrown together willy-nilly. I had a New Testament professor in seminary who would say the conversation was like this. Jesus is talking up above, Nicodemus is talking down below, and they never meet. Now, Nicodemus, like so many of us, is a literal thinker. Jesus tells him he needs to be born from above, or born again, as it is in other translations. And Nicodemus is puzzled. Then Jesus tells him he must be born of the Spirit. The Spirit is like the wind. You know it is there. You can feel it, but you don't know where it came from or where it is going. That is what it's like if you are born of the Spirit. Again, Nicodemus is puzzled. There is nothing unreasonable about his responses. Throughout John's Gospel, Jesus' teachings elicit one misunderstanding after another as his listeners try to make sense of his appeals to things of ordinary life, such as birth, water, bread, light, sheep, to talk about how extravagant and extraordinary is God's grace and love. In the end, we know that Nicodemus accepts that Jesus is indeed this teacher who has come from God, but the meaning of Jesus' teaching remains elusive to him. So what do Isaiah and Nicodemus have in common? Well, we know that God meets them where they are. Isaiah's reaction to God is to feel unworthy, and then God gives him what he needs. He is freed from his guilt, and his sin is forgiven with this burning coal brought to him by the seraph. So with no hesitation, Isaiah volunteers to serve God. Send me. And Isaiah is called to be a bridge between heaven and earth. Nicodemus approaches Jesus under the cover of darkness. He is a man in a powerful position who is willing to make himself vulnerable. If the circumstances are right, the cover of darkness. And Jesus meets him where he is and challenges both his knowledge and his faith. We know that he leaves Jesus after his conversation as lacking in knowledge and understanding as he was at the outset of that conversation. But we also know that Nicodemus persists in his faith, for he comes to assist in Jesus' burial, bringing myrrh and various aloes. Even lacking perfect understanding, he is able to receive the love of God, of God's Son Jesus, and of this Spirit about whom Jesus speaks. So what may we take from these two scriptures? In many ways, we are not unlike Isaiah. We may not feel worthy of God's attention and overwhelming love, unending love. Likely we are all good Presbyterians who take Paul's admonition to heart. We have all sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We are not worthy of this great gift of God's love. We are quick to point out our failings in living a life that honors and glorifies God. Even our understanding of what such a life entails is less than perfect. These thoughts could make us feel more comfortable approaching God in much the same way as Nicodemus approached Jesus, under the cover of darkness, in our own prayers meant for God's ears alone. We can then hide our perceived ignorance a little more easily. We have the freedom of being able to say things we would dare not utter in the light of day. And even in the midst of those doubts, we can muster the courage to approach our triune God with our imperfections, confident that God will meet us wherever we are. When we do so, we may not experience the drama of a burning bush like Moses did, or a burning coal like Isaiah did. It could be a seemingly unremarkable moment that leads to a transformation based on God's incredible love for all of creation, including those of us who feel unworthy or imperfect. We know that we belong to this mysterious, loving God who is full of grace and mercy, this God who is three persons in one. So practically speaking, the transformed lives we live still fall short if we believe what Paul wrote in Romans. We can see the difference, however, when we go about our life, that transformation acting on us. Sometimes we simply go through the motions, and sometimes the people who care for us bring us into God's goodness. We can see the difference in how we serve. Sometimes we do good because we want to think of ourselves as the kind of people who do good. Reach out, extend kindness and grace. At other sacred times, we care for others because God's love flows through us. We see the difference in how we treat people who are closest to us. Sometimes we stay with them only because we have promised to do so. At other times, we ask God to help us love them more each day. And we know the difference when it comes to worship. Some Sunday mornings, we tell ourselves, it is only an hour, I'll still get all of those other things that I have to get done today done. And sometimes there are moments when we feel the gentle breeze of God's Spirit. This transformed life we live is elusive, mysterious, and entirely of God's doing. Out of the surplus of divine love, God created the world, redeems the world, and through the Spirit continues to speak to the world. We need listen and spot where that Spirit is, for we will know it is there. To the Lord our God, Alpha and Omega, be all glory and honor forever. Amen.